And welcome everyone to Rock M Radio, a live broadcast of hopefully your favorite Mizzou basketball podcast, Dive Cuts. I am your host, Sam Snelling, broadcasting live from northern St. Louis County. With me on your right, my left is Matt Harris, all the way from Indianapolis, Indiana. And we're here to talk all about your Missouri basketball Tigers, the wonderful things that are happening for our boys in the black and gold. Matt, how are you?
I'm well. It's probably a good thing that we're doing this as the national championship game's going on. Um, if people would like to, I don't know if depending on how you bet this game, maybe talking to us is a good distraction, or watching us talk is a good distraction. But otherwise,
Yeah.
I'm
Last I
good.
checked, it was 17-3. Is it still 17-3?
It appears to still be 17-3 at the moment. We'll see if Washington can do anything to get some points here before the half, though. They're getting ready to receive the ball.
Nobody who's not like a Michigan fan actually wants Michigan to win this game, do they? And maybe like Washington State fans.
I don't know. I don't pretend to know what the Schadenfreude factor is for this game. It's basketball season. The fact this is on is mildly telling, but otherwise I'm good here. But I suspect that mood will change the longer this conversation goes on.
Well, so yeah, there's not a lot of good Mizzou basketball things to talk about at the moment. I guess we could spend a while talking about the good things that are happening for Mizzou players who are not Mizzou players yet. I did kind of catch that that Honor Batang had a nice week this past week, and
yep.
And so did he was up there in some tournament with was it him and Marcus Allen?
Yeah, they were at the Slam Tampa Hoop Fest. Little Rock Central won that event, but both played really, really well. I think they were both all tournament team. I think it was another good week. It's been kind of a nice run. Little Rock Central's playing a lot of featured events. They've been in, I think, a big event up in Kentucky. I think King of the Court up there, which is a big deal in near Louisville. Then they played King of Cotton or something like that, which is in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. That's a really, really big sort of revival event that brings together a lot of the state's best in Pine Bluff, which is about 40 minutes south of Little Rock. And then they jetted over to Tampa to play, I think, some really, really kind of regional teams more out of the Southeast. So if you are looking for optimism, Honors played really well in three, sort of nationalist or bigger regional events. It looked like every bit of a, borderline 5-star prospect. And Marcus has been really, really good back at Miami Norland. And last night, Jasper Johnson had a little bit of a homecoming in Woodford County, areas we know.
Yeah.
That we've gone
Bourbon Central,
that we've gone tramping around before. He dropped 37 last night in front of Dennis Gates and Kyle Smith-Peters. Who knows? Maybe they also use that as an excuse to get around, and do some bourbon tasting. But Woodford is really, really close to Lexington, so it made sense that they would get out early and squeeze in a recruiting trip. Yeah. So as you can tell, we're doing some stumping here and some stalling to avoid talking about what happened on Saturday.
Well, what did happen on Saturday is Missouri lost a game that I really think you could mark you cannot absolutely, or under any circumstance, you cannot lose this game.
Cannot lose that game.
And I mean, for what they wanted to accomplish this year, that is the case.
Yeah.
For what I think they still maybe hoped could be on the table, they could not lose that game, and they lost. Georgia is better than they were a year ago. Mike White, for all the guff he kind of takes, on in these circles, like most of it's because he's sort of chronically underachieved at Florida, and everybody has sort of kept expecting him to be better, and then Florida was never better.
Yeah.
I still think like Mike White is at worst a competent
Yeah.
high major basketball coach.
Yeah.
He just didn't meet the expectations for a lot of people in Florida. But I think going to Georgia, where the expectations are, should we say, meager? I don't think Mike White could probably make one NCAA tournament like the next 6 or 7 years and probably still be okay.
That's what Mark Fox did.
Right.
There's patience there. And he's landed Asa Newell, who's a top 15 kid. This class that he brought in, Silas Dimery, who we can talk about a little bit, had some nice moments on Saturday. Blue Kane's a guy that I think is going to grow into a quality kind of 2-3 over the next several years. That being outside of Gainesville and not being the guy who's following Billy Donovan, I think, is probably freeing in a certain way. They've been able to really make some good inroads locally. I don't know if they've dislodged Auburn and sort of that pipeline there, but Silas Dimery is a guy you got to get. Blue Kane's a guy you got to get. And to get Asa Newell, who is from the Athens area and his brother is a walk-on on the team, getting him in the door is big. They were really close to landing another top 15 kid, Darion Reed. That was a battle right down to the end. So he's doing a good job. I think what we've seen Dennis Gates do, which is getting the right kind of core freshman in place. I think you have to give him credit this year. He held on to Jabri Abdur-Rahim, who's really seen his jumper come along like we thought he would have to. And, he's even made really, really solid pickups in the portal. Like I think I said on Saturday, I liked a guy like Russell Chewa. Not fancy, kind of a throwback big, was at South Florida, does a couple things really well, but that guy winds up hurting Missouri because they find a way to get a mismatch. That's on Mike for finding that guy and getting him in place. So for as much, crap as we flip him sometimes, while he was at Florida, he's done a solid job getting UGA sort of on a healthy footing, and we'll see what he can do moving forward. But, this roster, it's not anything really fancy, but I think it's a solid roster. It's going to be competitive for an NIT bid if it keeps up at this rate. And at Georgia, that qualifies as really, really good progress. So I think they're feeling pretty much the opposite of how Missouri fans are feeling at the moment, given the tracks those two programs have been on this season.
Well, yeah, and so I published Study Hall today, and originally, I think the plan was, the game was early enough that I would knock Study Hall out and publish it Sunday morning. But the game was over, and there was all this this Blake Baker stuff going on, and I was just like, you know what, I'm totally just gonna cop out here, not write about the game, give myself some time to sort of process. And I'm gonna write a column on Blake Baker. So I did that, and I didn't really look at any of the stats, really until kind of last night. I went to write it, and I was revisiting it. I was really kind of bothered, maybe is the right word, for how lopsided the production on the Missouri side was.
Yeah.
They basically got points from three guys, and they got minutes from really just five, but Carolero played a little.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was the only guy off the bench that played more than 10 minutes. I think he played 12.
Yeah, Ant was limited, but apparently there were some family issues going on that sort of limited his availability, I guess, in terms of his availability to prep, therefore the ability to really log heavy minutes. But still, you would have been looking at 7-ish guys if Ant had played really in that game.
Because it did appear like, Vanover got in the game pretty early, and it seemed like that got turned off pretty quick. I think
he
saw some action there. I think there was a 3-minute segment he played, and then there was another 3-minute segment he played, and I think Gates at that point pretty much said, I've seen enough of you today, and set him. And that, I mean, really, realistically, like Vanover was never a guy who's going to play 30, 35 minutes, but he's a guy that you kind of hope can be like a 17, 18 to possibly up to like 20, 22 on a good night. So not getting minutes from him, not getting minutes, like, again, I don't really know what's going on with how he's using Trent Pierce, going from starting to like not even getting in the first half. And like, look, Aiden Shaw was playing pretty well. I see you kind of, want to ride him. He's more athletic. He can, challenge for rebounds a little bit better. Georgia had like apparently no clue that Aiden likes to cut to the basket and dunk the ball.
Yeah.
And they kept like switching on to him with guys who had no business, switching on him. Like, I think that's one of the reasons why they had to take Chu out for so long, because Aiden was eating him alive on cuts. But it did sort of seem like there were several points where Missouri was like gonna seize control, and then you would just have like 3 or 4 absolutely flat possessions in a row. And a lot of that just comes down for me to the fact that they were only getting production from Sean East, from Aiden Shaw, and Aiden Shaw is not a guy who you're going to throw the ball to and say, like, he was benefiting from Sean East being ball dominant and driving the ball. And then Tamar Bates also had a nice day, but still only took 11 shots. I mean, Sean East took 20.
Yeah, at this point, they really are functionally 7 deep. You know that the 3 returners are going to play a lot. Out of necessity, Tamar Bates is going to play a lot. Aiden Shaw, depending on how you want to classify him as a starter or not, or one of the first guys off the bench, that gets you to 5 realistically. And then, when you look at the sub pattern most nights, it's Ant is probably the 6th guy, then Connor's been the 7th, and then you really start to look at what's happened, and I think this is really where I sense a lot of frustration from the fan bases. Those 8th and 9th spots are still, looking like, at least in this recent stretch, Jesus Carolero and Connor Vando and Kurt Lewis. And what we're not seeing is, more of Jordan Butler and more of Trent Pierce. And the question, which I thought you brought up today, which was pretty relevant in study hall, is how much of this is Missouri sort of, gauging what these vets can give them right now? Like, how much of this is, okay, we need to at least see what the vets can provide us, and then, right now, because we still have aspirations to try and stay on track for maybe an NIT bid. Can the guys that we brought in and have ample experience give us anything? And if that thesis doesn't prove right, then do you start to pivot? And I think that what we're seeing right now from, at least fans that I think, follow the team with a little bit more intensity, is they're at that point where they want to see a clear pivot. And I don't think the staff is there at this point. And I don't know if they'll be there even at the end of this week. We don't know what's internally the benchmark for them to say, okay, we've run this thing out as much as we can. We've got to try and, begin shifting our outlook. Does that go up into, do they continue to say, okay, let's keep seeing if we can bail water until we get Girl back, and maybe once we get Caleb back, everything maybe turns a little bit? We don't know the parameters under which that's happening, but I think that's the central tension point there is, why are guys like Zeus, why are guys like Kurt, and even at this point, why are guys like Connor, what affirmative case can be made for playing them over young guys? I think I tweeted out on Sunday, like, when you really look at the top lineups and you look at the impact on Missouri's efficiency, the vets really aren't giving you much more of a tangible impact than the young guys are. And if all else is equal, why not shovel some more minutes or start trickling those minutes over to the freshmen? we're not in practice. We're not in film room. There's a whole lot of other variables that go into this other than just me looking at a screen and looking at data or us watching film. There's a lot of other stuff happening behind the scenes that I think influence those decisions. But I think that's the central point of tension or frustration or angst right now is I think a lot of us, have strong assumptions about where this is headed. The staff, I think, has to figure out, at what point, they need to make the shift. And they clearly haven't reached that juncture yet. So I think that's one thing we're going to watch over the next week to 10 days is, does that inflection point get here? If it doesn't, I keep wondering, at least what we'll hear, and the staff won't care and won't hear it, is, I'm over this. Let's start looking to the future. I really think that's where we're getting to, at this point.
Well, and so, they've lost 4 of the last 5 games. They've lost 4 in a row to high major opponents.
Haven't really been competitive in those games for long stretches either.
That does coincide with, Grill, being injured. I really, I do think at least to some degree that they had kind of found some footing around the Pitt game, the Wichita State game, and things were working. They were looking more cohesive, and in particular, the thing that we've been complaining for much of the year about the use of lineups was way more clear and consistent in those 2 games. And it really looked like they said for those 2 games, this is what we want to do. And this is how we want to kind of deploy these guys. And this is what we're going to do. And they went out and they did it, very much to their credit. Grill goes down, and that really alters a lot because, and I'm not saying that with Caleb Grill, they're going to win these 4 games.
No,
but they probably could beat Georgia. Maybe you're a little bit more competitive, against Seton Hall. Maybe he's a guy that cans in a couple threes during Kansas's big run. It's one of those things where, we don't necessarily think that they're going to beat Kansas, but they looked really competent there for a while. So, I think there are 2 big wrenches that have been thrown into this season, that you can't really dismiss. And that's losing Caleb Grill right at the time you were figuring out your lineups.
Yep.
And the complete absence of John Tanji. 2 guys who I think the staff
slated to starters
thought would be starters. And so you're losing 40% of your starting lineup. This is this does remind me a lot of sort of like Konzo's second year, where they had this thing kind of, it was all sort of centered around Jonte. And I obviously there isn't a guy like Jonte on this team. So maybe that's where we get 2 significant injuries.
It's not 1-to-1, but
but the same sort of approach where and I think we can still be critical of how the roster was built, and the things that happened in the spring and summer and the way that they were putting together the roster and the guys that they thought were going to be one thing and ended up not being that thing. But I don't think you can really approach this season without sort of putting a huge caveat on the fact that John Tanji's given them nothing. Yeah. And, and Caleb Grill going out right when you were starting to kind of figure things out, it's just been horrible timing.
And the same thing sort of happened again. John Tanji is not 1-to-1 with Jonte Porter, but that's a guy they expected to, probably be one of their top 2 or 3 threats in the offense night in and night out. And Caleb Grill in a lot of ways could be kind of equated to Mark Smith. Mark went down right as they were starting to find a rhythm and find a sense of identity. And, when you took, Mark out on top of Jonte, there just wasn't enough. Every guy was being asked to do 10 or 15% more than they were capable of, and that was not sustainable, and there was grumbling even then about, oh, the roster's not great. It's like, well, in year 2, we built it with these key pieces and they're gone. And we didn't expect to have to ask all these guys to step up. We didn't expect Jordan Geist to become the guy in year 2. We didn't plan on that. We weren't, in some ways, Jeremiah Tillman showed up as a guy who was more of an athlete than a basketball player. You could say the same thing about Aiden. They weren't expecting Jeremiah Tillman to be a dude in year 2. They were expecting him to grow into a reliable starter. Like, people are loath to look back at the early years of Konzo and see that there was a lot of potential and promise there. It got sidetracked, obviously, but this is sort of the same thing. Now, the question that I think the obvious rebuttal to that is this staff has, as we've talked about a lot, really hit it out of the park in terms of prep recruiting. And I think that's what's buying them some grace right now, is everybody can look at it and go, okay, this season is probably close to being one you punt on, but the 3 freshmen have really shown some flashes at different moments. Would we like them to get more consistent minutes? Yes, because we want to start developing that, because there are 5 dudes showing up that we think are going to be a part of a really important core. So I think I get the sense that, people are still maybe bought in on Dennis, but this, sort of construction, this sort of vision, it's not a mood board they like. They very much just like to move on and start going to the time when they've got the really good dudes coming. And as always, hope is better than reality. And I think that's just where people are at this point. I think a lot of people are trying to write and read stuff on the wall and just begin transitioning towards what they view as better players to do, what this staff wants to do. But there's still 17 games left. So we got to figure out what to do then.
Yeah. Sam, which is close to Sam, but not Sam, wants to know when is Grill expected to be back?
Earliest timeline was 5 weeks, so that would probably be next week, but it doesn't sound like there's any news on that front. If it's the back end of that timeline, you're looking at late January.
Yeah.
So it's probably not in the next 2 weeks.
We're probably, like, I would say at least a week from hearing like a significant update.
Yeah.
Like I think usually when a guy's about a week out or 2 weeks out, you start hearing, oh, like, he's been cleared. And keep in mind, like, getting cleared means you can go back to practice and contact and those kinds of things. It's still probably going to take him another, week and a half at least to sort of get acclimated and back into the roster.
I've always assumed, like, functionally, you shouldn't expect him to be Caleb Grill until February 1. Like, I can't remember if it was a shooting wrist or not, but if it's a shooting wrist, then he hasn't even been able to do stationary shooting.
I think it was his right wrist.
Yeah. So if it's his right wrist, you can't even, like, stand under the hoop, and realistically. So it's going to be rust. There's, maybe he could do conditioning work to try and keep, in shape, but still playing back into game shape, real shots. I wouldn't expect it to be plug and play. Caleb Grill's going to walk in and shoot 38% first day back. So it's going to be a process there. And I think that's the other thing to keep in mind. If they are holding out for Caleb coming back, any lag there just creates more problems. So we'll see. But this may be a point where, timing works against them even then, because they've still they'll probably be halfway through the conference schedule by the time he's really functional and can do kind of what you would hope he would do. Where are they sitting when that happens? They may be too far gone at that point if the trends hold.
Yeah. We also had a question here from, I think, one of my favorite names. Oops. We've got another comment come in, but probably no chance for a medical red shirt. I would say probably not. He'll probably come back and play.
Yeah.
I would say there may be an outside shot that Tanji looks for that. But one thing to kind of keep in mind, these guys are also like super seniors.
They're 23 years old.
Right. And like I think like we're almost kind of seeing that from Nick Honor a little bit, where like how much energy do you still want to put forward towards playing in college at this point? And I think like that's the challenge of seeing a super senior guy who could maybe qualify for a medical red shirt and whether or not he actually wants to play. I think they could make a reasonable case for Tanji.
They
I
could.
think with Grill they'll get him back.
I think Grill may have crossed like the 30% minute threshold or was close to it, or he will cross it when he gets back.
Yeah.
So that may just take that out of question. With the other thing to consider is they've essentially recruited over all these dudes already.
Yeah.
Like Marcus Allen is basically in John Tanji's spot. Like if the goal is to start getting the freshmen and the guys coming in next year, ready to go and playing productive minutes, that you can't have a John Tanji on the roster. It doesn't work. And is John going to stick around? When reasonably he's going to look around and say there are 8 underclassmen on this roster. Like I think the thing that we have to keep in mind is Mizzou's bringing in talent, but it's going to be 8 underclassmen. Historically, that says that this is a team that next season, way far down the road, they should contend for a bid, but this is not a national title contender second weekend type of roster that they will likely have next year. Tanji will be 23, 24. There'll be 2 or 3 freshmen vying for his minutes. It's not a roster that's looking like it could be a second weekend team. He's a guy who could go, abroad and earn a little bit of money. So why not just go be a pro now and just start that next part of your life? So I think that's what I would probably consider more likely for John.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Like I said, I think that you could make an argument far better for Tanji than you could for Grill. Because I think Grill's going to come back. I think Grill's going to play.
Yeah.
And realistically, like I think one of the things that Grill kind of talked about when he committed was, being able to kind of help mentor, the younger guys, and so I think like fitting him in with Ant and with Trent and Jordan, getting him on the floor with those guys could do a lot of good as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
We want to talk about Kentucky at all?
Sure. I don't know how useful it'll be given that they play tomorrow night, but we can talk about the Wildcats.
Hey, we're live, so people are, they can get this at any point before the game tips off tomorrow night.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, normally when we record on Mondays, we don't go too far in on the early opponent if it's on a Tuesday, unless it's a Wednesday. But Missouri does take on Kentucky in Rupp Arena. If you haven't been paying attention, Kentucky's back. They're back. John Calipari has some 5-star freshmen doing 5-star freshman things. They went down to Florida. They beat Florida at Florida.
That was a fun game.
It was a fun game.
First half of it was fun.
Rob Dillingham is all kinds of fun. Reed Shepherd, great player.
The
Messiah Aaron Bradshaw's back and healthy.
The prince that was promised in Lexington is Reed Shepherd.
Yeah.
That is, if you want to see the Messiah for people from Eastern Kentucky, it's Reed Shepherd. He's everything they hope for, and they like it so much they're going to try and recreate it with Travis Perry next year. So
yeah, he's been great. Anybody doesn't know he's a legacy. His dad Jeff Shepherd played in the 90s.
His dad was on national title winner in the 90s.
What was that, 97,
I think. 97, 90. Yeah, I think so.
The
San Antonio one where they won over Utah, I think, was
Justin Edwards been a little bit of a disappointment. Antonio Reeves has been good. They're shooting a lot of threes, Matt. A John Calipari coached basketball team not afraid to shoot the basketball from outside the 3-point line.
Yeah.
This is something that is not very common for his teams. And so it's refreshing. Like Cal's getting with the times, man. And he's also lending credence to my belief that all these coaches are like hammering hard in the transfer portal.
They're overthinking
and
it, man.
There's no substitute for just bringing in good old fashioned high end talent.
Get dudes. Go get dudes.
Get the best dudes you can get. And they've got a lot of dudes in this team.
They do. I looked this up. They are 18th in tempo. That is the third fastest team of Cal's entire career during the Kim Palm era. They are blitzing the pace. This is their highest 3-point attempt rate since 2011. I think his second highest in the last 15 years. It is pace, space. They get out. They run to deep corners. They have a bunch of dudes that are fantastic playing out of ball screens. It is exactly what the fans in Lexington have been craving, and it's being spearheaded by a local kid. They're just euphoric about it. The big difference here too is his bigs are functionally very different. Trey Mitchell is a stretch 5. He's comfortable in space. He's long. He's fluid. He can move laterally.
He's a guy that if you've been listening to us long enough, you should be pretty familiar with him.
Yeah.
Trey Mitchell's been around the block.
He nearly took an official visit to Missouri way back yonder in 2018. Cornell man was his primary recruiter. Aaron Bradshaw's back. Had a foot issue, working his way in, still looks a little shaky at times, particularly on defense and moving, but long, freakish, can block shots, switchable 5 along with Mitchell. Edwards has looked a little rocky offensively, but he's been really, really good on defense, which is kind of his calling card. Good ball mover, makes good decisions, embraces being kind of a moderate usage guy. It really hasn't proven a lot to be sort of an issue to get him to buy into sort of being that swing kind of piece at the 4 spot. But they are just a death machine in transition this year. And we already saw what happened when Missouri played 2 teams that are very, very good in transition. So what will they do tonight? They were okay against Kansas. They were not so good against Illinois. But Kentucky is better than both of those teams.
Yeah,
at playing on the break. So, we try and be nuanced and in-depth and granular. Don't let Kentucky push the basketball. Don't do it. Don't make this a track meet. Don't do what you did against Kansas last year and think we play how we play. We're going to go do that. Don't do that. Don't run with Kentucky. It's going to go poorly. It's not going to go the way you want. Really slow this game down and just play pack line defense and just make them play in gaps. So that's we'll start there with Kentucky. Don't run with them. Play slow. Make them take contested pull-ups. It may just be as simple as that.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how this game's going to go. I'm not super positive. I think Kentucky's playing really well. They're playing confident. Usually, when Cal has young teams, they can be a little rocky at the start of conference play, and they went on the road and they did not look uncomfortable playing.
They didn't buckle.
In a really, really loud and crazy environment in Gainesville. There's always, so what is this? There are an 89% chance to win. So there's 11% chance that Missouri could win. What are the factors that Missouri sort of needs to happen? They need to shoot the ball well. Missouri has not shot the ball well for, it seems like, a while.
Yeah.
And if you're efficient in the half court and you can slow Kentucky down, maybe you can frustrate their young guards, and you can make the game competitive. You could sneak out of there with a win, but I'm not feeling super confident with the way that Missouri's been playing. That I think that this is going to go their way.
I think there's the team you want and the team you have. The team Missouri wants would be willing to kind of like trade punches here. The team they have is one where I think you've got to make some compromises. As I mentioned, I don't think you want to run with Kentucky at all here. I think you want to get into the half court with them. I think you want to make them, have to, hit pull-ups, hit tough twos. I think you want to play in gaps because this is a team that, aside from punishing you on the break, is elite in spot-ups and shooting off the catch. And to sort of bring it back to Georgia did a fantastic job leveraging Missouri in ball screens, winning at the point of attack, forcing that low help defender to rotate. You got to help the helper, and now you've got an open corner shooter, and you are in scramble to close out. You cannot do that against Kentucky because they will just bury you. I think, switching everything may not be a great move here. I think you may have to get conservative in your coverages. I think you may have to sit guys deeper. If you can keep the guards in front and you can keep them from moving you and at least force Kentucky to hit guarded jumpers, if Kentucky buries 35, 36% of guarded threes, fine. Like that, good luck. That's good offense. But I think you've got to try and sit in gaps. And then sometimes Missouri's tempted to leak out and push. I think you got to send everybody to the glass, crash the glass, get rebounds, come down. And this group is okay defensively, but Dillingham and Wagner, you can beat them up in ball screens, and they're not great in isolation. And they will give up, runners and, pull-ups and stuff. You know what that is? That's Sean East music. Come down, run your pistol action, guard-to-guard screens, force them to switch, see if Sean can get baseline and flatten it out, and then play out of it. But trying to get out and push and hit an early clock and, do that kind of stuff is not going to be conducive here. I think you want this game at 65 possessions, quite frankly. Sometimes you say underdogs want more possessions because it's more opportunities. I don't think you want that here. I think you want this at 65 possessions. You want Kentucky frustrated. You want them looking to push, to get the pace up, making some mistakes, turning the ball over and trying to hunt that. I think you've really got to get this pace under 70 possessions and really come down and find ways to exploit guard-to-guard screens and just be sound in the shell defensively. If you can get to the under 8 in the second half, within a couple of possessions, maybe game pressure takes over. But I think it's going to be a night where you got to be really disciplined with the game plan, do some things that maybe you don't always want to do to give yourself a shot here. Because toe-to-toe here, I don't think this goes the way anybody wants to see. Or it's going to be a really quick – everyone's going to bail out quickly on viewing this one. I think they've got to make some hard choices here and go against some things they would probably want to do in any other event.
Yeah, when you sort of like look at the different ways that this game can go, younger teams are easy to frustrate with slower pace. You do sort of run the risk of, struggling with rebounding, which we know Missouri can do. Some of their issues over helping, how they tend to kind of, do flyby and closeouts as opposed to, chopping your feet and staying low. These are all things that you're probably going to run risk of regardless, whether it's a full court game or a half court game. But we've seen Missouri kind of go into tough environments, and Rupp is not that tough of an environment, and not be fazed by the environment. So I think this is a game that they can play in and be a part of, and hopefully kind of keep it close. For me, like, I just, having watched Kentucky multiple times this year, I just think that they're playing with way more confidence than I expected them to be at this point. But also, like, I think part of that is the guys who have played the best for them are not the guys that I think a lot of people expected to sort of be, as featured. I think like Wagner, I think a lot of people sort of thought he was going to be the guy with Justin Edwards. And while Bradshaw's kind of, getting his feet going, it's really kind of been, Shepard and Dillingham who have been, the standouts of that class. So that, the two guys who were the lower ranked recruits. So then, let's pivot, I guess, to the weekend game, which is a game that heading into the season, I'm sure everybody marked as an automatic dub. And
2 automatic dubs.
Now, South Carolina, who is preseason the 14th ranked team by just about everybody, including the basketball geniuses at Rock'em Nation. South Carolina looks pretty good. They're 13-1. Excuse me, I almost said 12-1. They're now top 60 in KenPom. Just beat Mississippi State at home. Mississippi State has Tolu Smith back. Tolu played in that game. South Carolina went toe to toe, and you know what? Like, Michi Johnson has taken a step.
Yep.
That I did not think he was ever going to take. He was a kid he was a highly recruited player, classified to Ohio State, never put it together at Ohio State. And to me, like, how he looked last year at South Carolina, how he looked at Ohio State, he looked like a guy who, like, his progress had flatlined.
And he's not a point guard, and he was playing point guard.
Well, he's taken a step, and he's really been a dynamic playmaker for them, and that's something that team really needed. Yeah. They've got some good shooters, but they have a guy that they can go to now to sort of make plays offensively, and that's been a big boon for the Gamecocks.
I mean, credit to Lamont Paris. We talked about last week kind of how the portal can be high variance. We looked at this portal class, and I don't think we said, yeah, this is the makings of a bubble team here. But I think what Lamont Paris did here, and he deserves credit for, is I think he probably realized Michi Johnson's not a true point guard. He's more of a scoring point, so you can bump him to the combo spot and use him in ball screens as a scorer and as a threat. And the shooting off the catch has come a long way for Michi too. He deserves credit for that. Talon Cooper's always been kind of more of a traditional setup guy, initiator. So now you can use him to get into your sets. You can use him to make the right decision to get things organized and get Michi into situations and sets and actions where he can really, really thrive. Credit to him. We sort of joked, Miles Studi's a combo forward. He's not a wing. He's playing the wing and shooting a really good clip there and bought into kind of being a spacer. Stephen Clark is a guy out of the Citadel. I don't think any of us would have really looked at and said, yeah, that's an SEC caliber player, but he's doing all the kind of little things for them. And BJ Mack's a really, really hyper skilled, kind of bully five. And
we did like the Mack addition.
We liked Mack.
I did think that they were going to be better this year than they've been. But I thought they were going to be more like, I don't know, like probably close to what Missouri is, which,
right.
Like hanging on, just outside the top 100. And who knows, like maybe that's where they end up. But like the SEC schedule can become a slog really fast.
It can.
And they did win this game at home. They weren't on the road. There was a lot of energy in that building.
But I think what you can see the imprint of Wisconsin on Lamont here. They don't play fast. They're not particularly elite at anything on offense, but they don't turn the ball over. They have enough size to go to the glass to offset any turnovers they do have. And they shoot 35% on a high volume of threes. They run good stuff. They get to their spots. They don't give away possessions. And when they have to make shots, they do. And in a league like the SEC where, skill isn't always something rosters have, having guys that, understand how to play at the right pace, to get to their spots, to run good stuff and can execute, with enough skill, you can give yourself a puncher's chance. Missouri doesn't have the shooting right now to sort of make the spacing and some other aspects of this offense work. If Missouri was shooting about what South Carolina is right now, I think you'd see Missouri kind of in the same range. I think they would have given themselves some opportunities, to stay in some games and maybe prevail, but that hasn't happened. So we can talk about, we're surprised by South Carolina, but I think they've done a good job understanding who they are and executing.
And they also approach scheduling the same way Dennis Gates did last year.
Right. Just load up on I think that may be what hurts them. They're 324 in non-con.
Yeah.
If they can't slip up in SEC play because they don't have any quad 1 wins or any real quality out of their non-con. But Lamont Paris isn't going to care if this team winds up going 12-6 because it's going to get in the NCAA tournament. So, I get it from their perspective, but this is a matchup where perversely I feel worse about this one for Missouri than I do for Kentucky because Lamont Paris is going to be fine playing slow.
Mm-hmm.
They're fine dragging things out defensively. They're going to sag into gaps. They're going to keep everything in front. They're going to be fine switching and sagging and letting Sean Easton, try and get to the baseline and see if Missouri can play out of it. And, they want to force contested pull-ups. They want to force runners, and they're really good at guarding them. They're in the top 10% nationally at guarding those shots. They're going to say, all right, Missouri, come down and run your stuff. We'll see if you can hit threes, and we'll see if you can hit guarded twos.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to make this a slog for you. And by the way, we're better at rebounding than you, so we're going to go to the glass, and we're going to limit your second possession. So, it could go sideways in a different kind of setup, but I think people are going to tune in and go, okay, it's Carolina. We should be competitive. And I think that could be a really frustrating watch if Carolina is locked in and doing what they want to do, because it's going to look like grinding the gears, and it's not going to be pretty. And if Missouri can't make shots to force Carolina out and prevent them from shrinking the floor, I think a lot of people are going to be kind of annoyed at what they see, and particularly the result of what they want.
You do get a chance to watch South Carolina take on Alabama with their first road game since early December, which was at East Carolina. So there's a little bit of a difference between going to Tuscaloosa, and I have no idea where East Carolina is located. Do you?
It is in Greenville. It's in Greenville.
Greenville? Okay. Mm-hmm. A little bit of a difference. And so, we've also talked about Alabama. I'm kind of interested to see how South Carolina plays, because I'm not impressed with Alabama. Alabama can score the ball, but I think they're probably going to outscore South Carolina.
They didn't look good at Vandy. Did not look convincing at Vandy at all.
No, that was a struggle for them. So South Carolina, they're getting their road game out of the way by going to Alabama, even if that's a close loss. Obviously, you don't want to get blown out for them. But if it's a close loss and then you're turning around, you're going to Columbia, Missouri, you've got to be thinking all right, we can win that game, like Georgia just won that game.
Yeah. At this point, I don't think you can put 0-2 off the board for this week. I don't have a lot of confidence going into Lexington, and maybe Missouri plays well enough to get itself righted a little bit to benefit when South Carolina comes to town. But this is a team that I think you accurately summed up in study hall. They're not consistent enough offensively. They don't have a rotation, pieces that beyond that number 7 spot that make you think, okay, if their main guys are struggling, they can go get offense and piece it together. And, defensively, they're regressing quickly to what we saw last year. I think you could have legitimately said in non-con, this team looks more buttoned up. They look more organized. But the 2-point shooting had gotten bad around early December. And it was just a question of would the 3-point shooting sort of regress, and it has recently. And, it really did against Georgia. So if this team still has room to sink defensively, I'm just not sure, what you can hang your hat on right now to say, okay, this group can go get a win because, okay, they've got Sean East. Well, South Carolina's got Michi, and I think that they've got guys that at least up and down South Carolina's rotation, or at least giving them one consistent thing, and that's shooting. And Missouri doesn't have anything outside of Sean that it can point to and say, okay, we as a group can do that.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to pick this team right now because there's nothing I can coherently say that they do well enough that's going to cause a problem for somebody else. And, I don't know if that's going to change over the next couple of weeks, barring a trip to, Vanderbilt, near the end of the month or in early February. I think there's not anything right now that you feel confident enough in this team doing to say, okay, we can definitely take them in a game. At best, everything's a toss-up for them right now, and you hope that they play competently enough to prevail. But there's nothing that I would look at and say, yeah, that's a sure W on the schedule right now, given their form.
Yeah, I think you look at the two best 3-point shooters on the season so far have been Sean East and Tamar Bates, who we have both said, and has been sort of a point of contention that with their percentage where it was, they're simply not taking enough shots.
Tamar needs to shoot more.
I'm a believer that if you're shooting 55% from 3-point range, you need to shoot more. Like even if the percentage drops, which it will, you are still like a Tamar Bates 3-pointer, if he's a 40% shooter, is still better than virtually any other possession that Missouri has going.
Even if he's a 37% shooter, it's better than anything they're getting right now at the rim. So
right.
It's just
I think, and this same thing with Sean East, who, Sean East is a little more choosy, and obviously his past shooting the basketball is a little more checkered. But still, like if you're shooting 60%, you need to shoot more often, because like Missouri right now needs something that they're good at, and they just they don't have that. Let's to your point, there's nothing that they're sort of contributing.
We talked about this a little bit in the chat, and we'll be quick about this. Missouri's offense, or its skill players, really, really value mid-range shots. Sean East, throughout his career, has been a guy who has really loved getting into his bag for pull-ups, runners, floaters. Tamar Bates is a guy who we've often said, kind of, you squint and you can see shades of Kareem Rush there, but he's a guy who wants to play, get to a pull-up, whether it's on the baseline or, maybe in some middle ball screens, but he wants to play in the mid-range. As I wrote a couple weeks ago, a lot of what Noah Carter wants to do is get in bully post-ups, and that's hook shots and runners. And so I think I jokingly said on Saturday or Sunday, Missouri's racking up what I'm calling near paint touches. They're getting right to the edge of the paint, and they're putting up floaters, or they're putting up turnaround jumpers, or they're getting 1 foot into the paint and they're trying a jump, or they're trying a floater or a runner. They're not getting to the rim, direct to the rim, and forcing a big or forcing a help defender to play with verticality and foul them. So when Dennis Gates is talking about, we're not drawing enough fouls, it's because your guys are getting 2/3 of the way there and then attempting really tough twos. And SEC officials, while they're whistle happy, aren't going to bail you out there. So you've got Sean East, you've got Tamar Bates, passing on quality threes to take, shots they tend to prefer, but maybe aren't as valuable or as good. So, and I know that's going to sound like I'm saying ban the mid-range. I'm not. I'm saying there are opportunities where they're passing up threes, and the shots they're passing up sometimes wind up as lesser shots later on in the possession. So they've got to find a way, I think, each of them to take 2 or 3 more quality jumpers per game. And if they can do that and they hit at a reasonable rate, the offense might find enough sort of consistency to limp its way through until Grill gets back. And then okay, we have a floor spacer again. We can sort of, go back to business as usual. Right now, I think they're just not, sort of really living in the reality of their situation and what their rotation can provide. And again, we're going to say it again. We're going to be a broken record. They've got to make some compromises if they want to try and keep their head above water. If they don't, this thing's going to, the pumps are going to get overwhelmed pretty quickly.
Yeah. I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add, because we're going to have to talk about these guys, again next week.
Yeah, we are. I'm glad that 10 to 15 people have enjoyed watching us sort of kvetch and get through this, but we'll always find a way to do an autopsy every week, even if it all kind of comes to the same cause of death.
Yeah, it does look like Washington scored again. So now it's 20-10. So I can report that. We've have had several comments about John Berger saying that some of the guys are playing too many minutes. It's something that I wrote in study hall today. Like, Sean East playing 40 minutes. I realized like it was reported after the game that the Ant had been away from the team. It was just one of the reasons why he didn't get as many minutes as he might have normally. So that's understandable. But still, like,
you can play guys minutes. You can play guys less minutes when the reserves are giving you something.
Right. And that's another part of it is, regardless of how we feel about it, like, I don't know that I would have liked to seen Trent Pierce sooner. Like that's maybe my biggest complaint is like he did move away from Trent Pierce. Maybe Trent had a bad week of practice or was sick. I don't know. But he could have done that. I think you probably could have gotten away with maybe Jordan Butler a little more. But the reality is like there aren't really that many other guard options, and guys who are going to provide consistent play, and especially with the way that they were playing against Georgia, I just don't think there was
no.
They really needed John Tanji to be comfortable with his foot, and they need Caleb Grill back, and then I think this team could.
It's the same thing.
Be kind of like what we thought they might be, which is it's kind of a middle of the road SEC team.
I mean, it's the same thing we talked about when they went to the NCAA tournament last year. They were down to 7 bodies. They're down to 7 bodies again. Like, oh God, our guys are playing a lot of minutes. Well, go find me other options here, and we'll discuss that. But
Ben Sternberg,
that Jackson
Benny
Francois,
Buckets.
It's time for Jackson Francois' emergence.
Oh boy. I have a little more faith in Benny Buckets getting a, hitting one of his patented runners, or maybe just a 43-foot heave at the buzzer. So we're gonna get out of here. I don't know exactly what the timing on next week is going to be. I'll be honest. Next Monday is my wife's birthday, so we're not going to record a podcast on Monday, despite my efforts to get this back on Mondays. I'm thwarted by the calendar again. We'll let you know how that gets updated, but we will have another podcast next week. There's a lot of basketball still to play, and I think there's a lot that we can still learn about this team, even if they're losing. We definitely have a coaching staff that I think a lot of people still believe in, and certainly they aren't real happy with how things are going as well. So there's still a lot that we can learn, and I think that this is also a lesson for these guys and how they may approach roster building this upcoming spring. And we'll talk about that plenty. But that's all we've got for now. We'll be back next week. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Hey, go Mizzou, I guess.
Adios,
everybody. Have a good night.